Well, hello, and welcome to another edition of Becoming a Gibborim. This is part 6, y'all, and this is without question the part where everything turns to the oh my goodness, did that seriously just happen kind of side of the story. This is the time in our lives, quite seriously for each and every one of you, where the whole world stands with its breath suddenly inhaled, waiting. It's called a natural pause, but it generally should happen right after you exhale. This is when, for those of you guys that are all into the firearm side of the world, this is when the whole moment of life, you should not be taking your shot. This is not the time where you've sucked in a huge, massive lung full of air and you're just holding it. This is not the time to take your shot. However, we're going to read about a time in history where a whole lot of people were about to go through that big, natural, unbelievable big inhale, catastrophically gut-wrenching, kick in the Netherlands side of life. Yeah, because you can expect one thing with absolute certainty for the rest of your life. That's the unexpected. That's those moments in life where things just suddenly upheave themselves and vomit in your face. Actually, vomit in your face. Because I also have toddlers, and they do that. So my world involves a whole lot of vomit, actual vomit, constantly. If you don't know what I'm talking about, it's okay. But it's about becoming a Gibborim. And yes, quite seriously, it's biblical to have all kinds of unpleasantness occur in your life and the lives of the people around you, actually with regularity. It's generally not the norm to have peace like a river in your soul. You should have it in your soul, but I talked to you about this earlier in Soul Ties, part 3 of Becoming a Gibborim, all about soul ties, that really there's 3 parts to a man: body, spirit, soul, tripartite nature of man. Yeah, your soul should have some peace like a river flowing through it, but I absolutely believe that the vast majority of you who are watching this today don't. You may have some trickles in there. You might even have a brook or two, but it's unlikely that you have the Missouri River flowing through your soul with peace. I'm not talking about everyone, but it is really critical to understand that this episode, this very week, has been a brewing since the day I was born. It was the moment in time where I first read 1 Samuel 21 and 22, where my whole little world just went, what? What? Because nobody ever talked about with the wonderful stories of David and Goliath and these mighty men and all these people who did these heroic acts. I never once heard a pastor talk about just the weapons. And I want to talk about the weapons because mighty men and mighty women always got some weapons. And they don't always look like spears and staffs. Sticks, remember we talked about this? Universal weapon, forever, pretty much legal for all eternity. I'm certain, actually, for eternity you can carry a stick, no matter what climate or kingdom you end up in. Obviously there's some caveats there. But there is so much happening in this story, in this moment, this tiny little squished down moment in time, that I have been probably speaking and talking about it or waiting to talk about it since the first time I ever heard about it. Because the weapons that are actually going to be discussed in this story from the first time David picks up the sword of Goliath, that moment in time was a very pinnacle time in David's life. It's a pinnacle time for each and every one of us, the moment we first encounter a real serious, devastating tool. And I'm not just talking about like bronze swords, which are really full of copper and tin, which make it really effective tools for defeating other kinds of enemies that are out there. Maybe we'll get there. Maybe some of you guys in metallurgy camps will start to get there quicker and sooner with the tidbits of information I'm giving you. Look at drill bits. Anyways, drill bits. Just go study drill bits and think of how you could convert that into a spear. I need drill-bitted spears. You know what I'm saying? Because some of these things that you got to go against are dense and immeasurably harder than you think normal flesh meat might be, like stone. Imagine just trying to build a spear that can go through stone. Well, I found a way that you can go right through stone, and that's called the living water. True story. It'll cut right through rock. If you didn't know it, you can actually get water out of rocks. It just requires a supernatural living God True story. And he's willing to empower each and every one of us, no matter what weapon may be in our hand, because you could genuinely just carry a spatula and be a devastating individual in the kingdom of heaven. True story. I've known some suave chefs out there that cooked armies meals, actual armies. Like, I watched humans make an army meal. I know there's some moms out there that I look at with the same awe, because you feed tiny armies all the time. All the time. That's a mighty sword. Most people never think about the most powerful tool in their playbook being like the chef's preparation knife, or the spatula you shove into the pan instead of your fingertips. These are really critical tools for your life. If you ever went backpacking one time for more than 2 days, you experience life in a little bit more unpleasant way, because if you can only carry what's on your back out into the forest or into the wilderness, and suddenly you need to make a meal and you don't have a spoon, but you got 50 rounds of 50 BMG ready to take down a tiny little thinly walled tank. 50 BMG, for those of you that don't know, is just a half-inch round of unbelievable, catastrophic, destructive power. It goes into what used to be a machine gun until people got smarter and put it into tiny, single-barreled instruments that just cause devastating harm to things far away. I know. If you've ever carried 50 rounds of BMG, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You're a special kind of individual who I love dearly, and I appreciate you for just keeping your finger off the trigger until you were ready to fire. Thank you. I get distracted. If you don't know this about me, expect it. Because when I think about devastating weapons like the Sword of Goliath, I think about modern versions of it. The Goliath that we actually know about, not the cartoon character that you saw maybe on a fuzzboard when you were little, like the superhuman giant Nephilim warrior tank that he was, probably had the most spectacular sword maybe ever. I mean that. Because there's certain kinds of tools out there that are genuinely earned through mighty acts. Like, you have to go through something or do something so exceptional, so rare, so unique that it causes those around you to bestow on you something equal or even greater in potential. And I really believe that's weapons. When you get ensnared maybe in the video game world and just the unrelenting garbage lies that you drink in that through the upgrade system, you're on a roller coaster of a psychologically designed trap to keep you in it forever. The upgrades, right? If you like weapons, there's all the upgrades known to man available for you. I think there's customizable options into the tens of millions. Actually, tens of millions for some of these games guys and gals are hooked to. So I'm drinking water. You should drink water. Fundamentals. Remember my video on escape and evade? You need a vassal to carry your water because you're going to need to thirst all the time. You're going to always be thirsty. Don't doubt it. Get a container, ideally a big one. I've had this for 5 years. 5 years. It survived me for 5 years. Very little things in this world survived me for 5 years. This is one of them. But I have I've covered it with duct tape, Gorilla Tape. I apologize to all you ducks out there. Unbelievable. Gorilla Tape. It's a great place to hide all kinds of stuff, like the bottom of my water bottle from denting itself to pieces on rocks. Because I go outside, remember? Get outside. If you haven't done it today, I don't care what the weather even remotely looks like where you're from. Just go out there and get uncomfortable for at least 3 to 6 hours a day. It'll change your soul. It'll dig a new well in your soul for those rivers to flow. True story. Anyways, wear proper clothing. Layer if it's cold. If you get warmer, take your clothes off appropriately to the level that you need to regulate your temperature. Anyways, clean canteen water bottle. It's an insulated water bottle. It's 64 ounces of thunderous thirst-quenching capabilities in here. And I covered it, of course, with my cordage. This is 550 cord. By that, I mean it's 750-pound military-grade parachute cord. It's advertised very well by human beings falling out of the sky. Have you ever trusted your life to a piece of fabric and cordage? I have. Never jumping out of the sky, though. I would love to. If any of you ever would like to, invite me for some high altitude jumps. I've climbed up there. I've just never jumped from up there. Do you know what I mean? If you would ever behoove yourselves to invite me, I'd come along with dandy quickness and sure-footedness that comes from the Lord. But I covered it with paracord. I wrapped it around like yay, and then I wove this separate handle into it. That's just a normal paracord bracelet I wove back and forth 3 times, and I turned it into a giant, thick, caterpillar-like creature that I then wove into it this way. It's hard to do, but it's well worth it. Your water bottle should have a handle. If your water bottle doesn't have a handle, I don't know what you're doing with your life. Get a handle on there. It takes some challenge and difficulties, but I did it once, wrapped it up super tight, quenched it in cold water to shrink a little bit of the paracord, because it does shrink a little, but it endures. So now I have a vessel to carry my water continually, anywhere I go, no matter what happens. It's inordinately heavy. It's probably unnecessarily heavy, but when it's hot, I like cold water. When it's cold, I like cold water. The end. Swords. Goliath's sword was earned, I guarantee it. By that I mean through my most basic contextual abilities to observe what happened at that time from a distance of a couple thousand years. David earned his sling by probably braiding it out of leather. It was most likely leather from probably one of his sheep, maybe a cow or a goat. Maybe goat. Any slingers out there can let me know what's your favorite slinging leather. But Goliath had been a man of war, it says in 1 Samuel. It said he'd been a man of war since he was a youth. So since David was yonder lad, bouncing about the hills, slaughtering lions with a stick, maybe, or just his hands because he's a hoss. By that I mean he's tiny and very quick to get around the guard of a lion and get on its backspace and then choke down on their throats like it's going out of style. David, that little scampery youth. But Goliath was born into war. And that's just not a little bit of a thing. There's cultures that have been going on for a long time that just raise their children up from the day they're conceived to be a warrior. And like warrior children are real. Any parent out there that has a strong-willed child, and not just a little bit, like the immeasurable fortitude strong-willed children, you know exactly what I mean. Some of you children were born warriors immediately, without question, and they were made for that, and they should be trained and raised up to do that. But back in the days of Canaanite, pagan idolatry, and mass constant warfare, and this is the types of lands where families settled disputes with spears. Exceptional, interesting, and more gentleness, I think, was used in the mouth speech. But Goliath was raised from his youth to be a warrior. And because of that, he probably had to go through the same process most warriors do go through, which is an unbelievable amount of anguish, suffering, bloodshed, chaos, violence, rage, deep, dark experience and initiation into the mystical arts of what I would say is being a left-hand path Cain, follower of Cain. Because once you start to kill humans, go back to the cost of killing video on my Way of the Blade series. Once you start to slaughter other humans and become a manslayer, you're going to carry something called the mark of Cain as an aspect of punishment and condemnation against you for slaying other humans. It's a spiritual repercussion for doing something that was spiritual as well as physical. So people that are raised in that culture can totally drink in and embellish and empower and fuel themselves by that spiritual flow. You get ensnared in that so deeply, you start to get connected to people around you who also are connected to that. And they have generally been people that have been using that kind of violence from their youth. And they tend to acquire better blades along the way. It's just a natural progression. Like, the spoils of war are serious. And if you've ever fought another human, actually just wrestled another human till one of you died and the other one just got up. If you've ever done that, there tends to be a desire to take something else along with you as a trophy or as a way of remembering that which has been accomplished for you. And so back in the days when it was a lot more socially acceptable to just go lay waste to an area or another army, and then you plundered their camp. You get to pick through the remnant of leftover battle gear and battle array. And if you are a mightier warrior, if you happen to just be someone who is the survivor every time, they're like that. It's real. They're survivors that just always end up getting up. They're the one woman who always endured when everyone else was just literally coming apart at the seams and disintegrating around them. That's a survivor. That's a remnant, potentially. They have this wherewithal, this fortitude that is unshakable, and they continue to rise and get up. And because of that, they get to plunder the enemy's camp. And Goliath, over time, I guarantee you, acquired some outrageously spectacular tools for his kit. He acquired what in modern day language speak might genuinely be the M82 50 caliber devastating anti-material rifle of his time. That means he could basically cut down not just like a dude, but like probably a horse, potentially even the cart that the horse's chariot frame was sitting on. Like, he could swing that thing with such unimmeasurable pain. It's not even a little bit like our swordcraft, because these men were so supra powerful. They were cutting things like objects in half. You know, you've seen those videos in your life where in a game, something with a super sword cuts the car in half. Like, I think they could actually probably do that without even trying if the tool was good enough. And this sword of Goliath is that sword. It's the sword after all the battles for Goliath's entire career. He's their champion, remember? If you've never been in an army, you know who your champion is. Like, guys literally wrestle each other and try to put each other in arm bars and head chokes and knock each other unconscious or silly when they're in military units for long periods of time. It genuinely is a culture of violence. And that's not all together terrible. Like, it was fun to wrestle with your buddy and try to just knock him unconscious in 6 seconds. So that's kind of awesome. If you've never done it, I don't necessarily recommend it on a regular basis, but it does something and gets you all fired up, and you're in this culture where everybody is just the warrior, and there's this ethos being poured into you all the time, and you literally just go and fight and contend with everybody else. But during that process, you sift out who is genuinely the champion of the entire division. Like, you have your soldier of the entire commander's army. He's your one guy. If you had to boil your whole army down to one human, one creature, that'd be him. Goliath has been that all the way through a time in history where there's other giants roaming around, like Ishbi-Benob. If you haven't read about Ishbi-Benob, he almost murders David. You haven't read the Bible enough if you didn't know there's other giants that actually almost murdered David. David was being defeated by Ishbi-Benob. I'm probably saying it somewhat incorrectly, but I don't mind unless I point it out. He was fighting a gigantic human, way bigger than your movie characters would like you to think they could be, like a supra-human, and he was going to die most seriously unless someone, a mighty man, a Gibborim, outclassed Ishbi-Benob, not in stature or weaponry, just in unbelievable unction, because he went in the name of the living God. He slaughtered that fool and saved David. So if you didn't know it, that was David's last day on the battlefield. We're going back to the first day. So from that time to there, David, actually his first tool we know that he actually picked up was Saul's armor, the spear that would actually end up being thrown at his head. Go back to headshots if you haven't. And Soul Ties video. He picks up, I think the first tool we know David picked up was a spear and the sword and the armor of Saul. That didn't fit him well because he was probably still minuto, tiny, like a little peppercorn, tiny little runt compared to superhuman giant that he went out to face. But the next time David picks up any kind of tool, serious working tool, it's the sword of the Superman, right? And he uses that to cut the head off of his foe. Strategic, probably separated it from his body. It would behoove you. Anyways, he took it and put it in the place of the skull, where I really believe Jesus was laying down his life and crushing the head of the serpent there, right there as it was biting at his heel. I think Goliath's skull made Golgotha have its name, not just a chunk of rock maybe. But I think the Father's more powerful at naming things than we are, personally. That being said, David took that sword with him, and he took the head of Goliath with him. But he took that sword, actually, and he dedicated it. You ready? Let's dive in. I'm going to read all the way ahead and try not to get too interrupted, but this is the most exciting sword talk I've ever heard in my life. Why do people not talk about super weapons and swords out of the Bible? They're way more fascinating than most everything else in existence. Most of you sword people are smiling and grinning like a cheetah just before it stalks something on the game. Let's go. Okay, so if I left you before, Jonathan and David say goodbye. They're soul-tied buddies, battle buddies for serious. Well, they just saw each other for the last time alive. The next time David hugs his buddy, it will be his bones. It will be his best friend's bones. So that's true, and that's the reality. But David doesn't know that yet, so he's skipping along on his egress, escape and evade. That's his plan right now. While he's out on his journey, he thinks, I need to resupply. Smart move. If you don't have in your network resupply points, you're basically SOL. That means you're out of luck, son. And not by luck, the pagan luck. I'm talking about you've made a poor decision about setting up a good friends list ahead of time. David set up a really solid friends list ahead of time. But the main one he knows, Samuel, he already did that one. Saul came there and tried to kill him there. That didn't work out so well for Saul because Samuel had the unction of the living God upon him. And so Saul prophesied till he was naked and unable to slaughter David. That was pretty spectacular. But now we jump ahead into the story where David's going to go run for some weapons. And I don't know specifically that he just went to the priests here for his swords, for any weaponry, but we know he went for bread because genuinely you're hungry when you're on the run. So you should genuinely find ways to make friends who have bread. Make bread. If you're not a farmer, consider being a farmer to people who carry swords. You can work together in mighty ways. So, I'll read the last verse. Jonathan said to David, go in safety, inasmuch as we have sworn to each other in the name of Yahweh, saying, Yahweh will be between you and me, and between my descendants and your descendants forever. Then he rose and departed, while Jonathan went into the city. Then David came to Nob, to Ahimelech the priest. And Ahimelech came trembling to meet David, and said to him, why are you alone, and no one with you? David said to Ahimelech the priest, the king has commissioned me with a matter, and has said to me, let no one, I'm going to burp. It's going to be uncomfortable. I apologize for this ahead of time, but man speak. Let no one know anything about the matter on which I'm sending you, and with which I have commissioned you. And I have directed the young men to a certain place. Now, therefore, what do you have on hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread, or whatever can be found. And Ahimelech answered David and said, there is no ordinary bread on hand, but there is the consecrated bread. If only the young men have kept themselves from women. David answered the priest and said to him, surely women have been kept from us as previously when I set out, and the vessels of the young men were set apart. Though it was an ordinary journey, how much more than today will their vessels be set apart? So the priest gave him consecrated bread. For there's no bread there but the bread of the presence, which was removed from before Yahweh in order to put hot bread in its place when it was taken away. Now one of the servants of Saul was there that day, detained before the Lord, and his name was Doeg the Edomite, the chief of Saul's shepherds. Enter the genuine worst guy, period, in the story. Way worse than Goliath. Way worse than Goliath. People think Goliath was the bad guy. Doeg, I will refrain from unpleasantries. Doeg the Edomite. He's the chief of Saul's shepherds. Okay, this is a wolf in sheep's clothing, right in this. If you thought that you had to go to the New Testament to find wolves in sheep's clothing, read from the beginning of the book to the end. Good gracious. There have been wolves in sheep's clothing since Cain. Yeah. What? Cain? It's not like he established a priest class, did he? Enoch the evil, like the son of Cain? You don't think he was the one writing all these horrifically Enochian magic, Babylonian Talmudic If you didn't know that Sumerian magic and all of the nonsense and horrific ruse of the world that we're under came from Cain. It came from the line of Cain's knowledge, not just talking about like loin Cain, not talking about Cain's loins, just talking about like the way of Cain. There's a splitting that happened right back at the serpent in the beginning to the end. And you got to understand, this is where a whole lot of our naughty doctrines came into. Doeg the Edomite, primary garbage, just human in this case, for real. This guy is the worst case scenario for you when you're on the run. Without question, this is the one loose end out there. And I'm just going to say that phrase. I'm going to pause on that phrase. If you don't know what a loose end is, all right, I'm going to try to say this without getting in trouble. You know what I'm saying? Okay, when you're on a mission, when you have been sent out in a special project, per se, and you're going after an individual, and they happen to have other people around them who witness you doing something that you ought not to have been, you witness you doing your mission. And those other individuals have eyes and ears that they tend to also pair with their mouthpiece and blab and rat you out. Okay? Those are loose ends sometimes. Doeg the Edomite, primary loose end in the history of David's life. I actually mean that. This man will be the cause of the greatest tragedy in this entire life of King David up until way after his fighting days are beginning to draw to their end. This guy is about to cause some of the worst devastation that has ever happened in the priesthood of the living God. He's one bad shepherd. One. And he is about to eradicate the priests and the ones who actually bear the name of the living God with unbelievable ferocity. Doeg the Edomite, primary horrific human. Loose ends tend to be nipped up, okay? It's unfortunate. It ought not to be that way, but it happens for a reason. Doeg the Edomite is one of those characters that you look back on the story and you just wish somebody put a spear through his chest plate immediately. Yeah, the worst kind. Anyways, I've had to experience some of this stuff in my life in an intimate way, and it caused ongoing perpetual problems for many other humans. Okay, then David said to... Sorry. I get a little heated on this, and you guys ought to get heated on it too, because if you don't know what it's like to go on the run, actually run for your life, and then need to tap in for resupplies at somewhere or at a rendezvous or at a safe house, and you go into the safe house and somebody else happens to stumble in on you at that wrong time in the wrong place and see your face somewhere and recognize you and know what you're doing, that person has the potential to not just kill you or report your whereabouts, but they have the potential to bleed that information to cause the person's house you're in to no longer be safe and instead to be set apart to destruction. So when you go on the run, I didn't even get a chance to say this. If you ever go on the run, and I mean actually on the run, because you're a criminal for the faith that you have and the beliefs you have, read it. The insanity of God. The underground church actually lives this way, and you should too. Get in the game. You're late to it, son. Suit up. Anyways, if you go on the run and you actually need to be on the run, like now, don't tell a lot of people. First of all, don't blab it. Make sure that you've set up communications ahead of time. Make sure that you've also got your clothes on, your gear ready, because you need to go now, maybe not when it's convenient, because go on the run. But when you do, be very careful about everywhere you go. Be very careful about every place where you choose to pop up for air. Because every time you do that, you potentially expose other people to an unbelievable amount of torment and anguish that may not have been for them. Sometimes it's required. And sometimes those people freely offer it, knowing the danger. Because if they're with you and if they're with the God you serve, he can set up a supply network that's supernaturally equipped to detect and know what people's needs are and answer them and meet them. So set up your network well, but be mindful of other witnesses. Be thinking about this stuff. Pray about it seriously before you do anything, because I don't know that David prayed before this. And what happens next is some of the worst things, except for this amazing best part. Okay, got a little worked up on this stuff. It's costly out there. Don't screw up now. It's important. All right. David said to Ahimelech, "Now, is there not a spear or a sword on hand? For I brought neither my sword nor my weapons with me, because the king's matter was urgent." Then the priest said, "The sword of Goliath the Philistine, whom you killed in the valley of Elah, behold, it is wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod. If you would take it for yourself, take it, for there is no other except it here." And David said, "There is none like it. Give it to me." Then David arose and fled that day from Saul and went to Achish, the king of Gath. By the way, Gath is where the sword of Goliath came from when it was worn on the hip of the Philistine giant Goliath of Gath. This is a weird part of the story. David gets the super weapon of Goliath in his hands. He resupplies at a spot at the house of the Lord where I believe David also knows he dedicated the super weapon of Goliath. He gave it back to the Father. That's one of the best things you could ever do with your sword. Okay? This is my sword. Actually, this is my Machaira. If you don't have a Machaira, get one. If you don't have a good quality sword, sell your stinking gun and get a sword. You can't practically delicately cut fruit with your gun. You can always practically cut basically everything you've ever needed to cut in the history of existence with this. And you can carry it openly and not make people go as much. I understand. This is my sword. My sword, I dedicated to the living God. I entrusted this, everything I could ever do with this, to him. And you know what he made me? A gardener, like a farmer, a vine dresser. Actually, I've been a vine dresser of thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of tomato vines. Not in number, just the same tomato vines so many times. I see tomatoes in my sleep. Actually, there's so many tomatoes, and they were wonderful. I couldn't use this on those tomatoes, so I used tiny, straight shears, little snips. They were amazing. I sharpened them with radical intensity. I sharpened this with unbelievable dedication and devotion. I don't maintain it to look pretty because I cut trees with it. It's okay. Your blade should look beat to tar. I like that look. It means you use it. Goliath was dedicated first to horrible, wicked, atrocious things, massive amounts of violence and bloodshed, and probably the slaughter of Israelites on a regular basis. Instead, David cut the head off that fool that was carrying it, and he then, I don't know that he actually used it in lots of battles after that. I know he absolutely dedicated it to the Father because it was wrapped in a cloth, and it was placed next to the ephod. The ephod was the priests, the Levites' priests' communication tool. It was his covering. It was the priest's armor, without question. So David's sword is literally sitting next to the armor of the living God all the time. That's charging it up with actual serious spiritual power. I'm not trying to tell you guys that there's such a thing as charged objects. I'm telling you there absolutely is a thing as charged objects. You can supernaturally pour power into objects and it can be contained in them. It's biblical. I'm not talking about making a wand. I'm talking about tools that were used for the Father to help pour himself on us. The same tools like a little knife he can use in all kinds of areas of our life and skills that we already have. And he can pour himself on us and make us a conduit of his spirit. That's what he likes. The enemy has a counterfeit version, though, where they charge objects with spiritual powers. David's consecration of that sword by dedicating it to Yahweh was to set it apart, was to make it holy, because it was not holy before that. But you can take something that once was unholy and offer it to the one who can wash it and purify it and cleanse it and set it apart to do good from that day forward. David goes to the priests before this and gave them the sword of Goliath. That's an unbelievable offering. It's, to me, the most incredible thing he ever gave to Yahweh. I actually believe that for me. To give the sword of your champion, instead of the wall hanger behind your head all the time when people came to meet David, you wouldn't want that right over your head all the time, like, yeah, you're going to make some military decisions, I understand, and you want to tell me what to do here. Reference giant sword with my rock. I got that. So he doesn't do that. He doesn't brag about that weaponry. He literally wraps it up and he leaves it to the Father. And you know what? He entrusts himself. If you ever need me to pick up my sword again and use it for anything other than what I'm currently using it for, it's yours. Just, you have it now. And if you ever need me to pick it up, I'd be glad to. But David now has an opportunity in his life where that sword is placed back in his hands. David is given literally the daily bread, the set-apart bread that came from the presence of the living God, like the actual presence of God. The presence of Yahweh used to physically come down in this tangible way. He would come and sit on the mercy seat and put his feet on it. Read about the footstool of the living God. Read the book. It's amazing. If you haven't read it, the living God would come down and sit on it, and his presence would go forth like fire. Son, fire would come out of there. Living, liquid, molten fire, and the glory of the living God, like the real one, not like the holy rollers and this like new age kundalini outpouring garbage that's indwelling so many humans out there under this false pretense of a new reformation. There's such an unrelenting amount of wolves in your flock that fire from another camp has burned into that movement. So be on guard against the wolves. The real spirit of the living God, when it came down, it consumed people and their flesh if they were not in a right standing with him. It is such a dangerous thing. It's the most dangerous thing in existence. Really, the presence of the living God. It's destruction without measure. It's the most powerful thing ever known because it's the set apartness of him. The holiness of God is the most powerful thing ever. And if you get to be in the presence, I believe through our great high priest, the mediator, you can be in his presence anytime when you have need. The purer blood than Abel that cries out covers the mercy seat of sacrifice forever that allows us the opportunity to step boldly into the throne of that awesome, mighty power. That's available to you anytime you need it. David placed his tools right there. The priest, Ahimelech, put his tools right there, okay? They put the daily bread also right there because that was a sweet savor and sweet goodness it is. If you've never had fresh baked bread from scratch from a woman who loved you, I'm sorry for your loss. It's one of the genuine best things known to a man. It will sustain you. So what do you think the holy bread was like? What do you think it was like to eat the bread of heaven? The actual bread of heaven. When you were on the run and more, I talked about that in Escape and Evade. You're never more tired in your life and you're never more hungry in your life because you've probably not burned 15,000 calories in a day recently, have you? Have you actually burned 15,000 calories in a day before? I know humans who do this, not a little bit. Like guys who go for days, weeks, and months at caloric intakes of 8 to 10,000 to just barely kind of maintain a starvation level because they're using their bodies so immeasurably hard. You can do more with your mind's use of your caloric intake than you can with your body, okay? You can toast yourself in a totally different way for ongoing periods of time when you're in a mighty man stance. You're going, man. And if you've ever gone on the run with actual fortitude to physically run for 150 miles, go look into long distance ultra marathon guys. That Natural Born Heroes was a great book I recommended previously that deals with humans like that. Endurance feats. Study them. The human capacity is more exceptional than anything you ever actually believe because you've listened to too much Disney mind control garbage and you've been filled with an image of what makes a Superman super. Kryptonite and other angel Kal-El and these other nonsense, folks. The living God talks about what makes you mighty, and it's his set apartness. It can come on you at any time, and a single morsel of your daily bread could sustain you for 40 days and 40 nights. I read about in 2 Kings, 1st and 2nd Kings, Elijah. Elijah gets a meal from an angel, one meal, actually two. He breaks bread with an angel. I'm pretty sure potentially the angel of the Lord. Capital L's, capital O's, capital R's and D's. Maybe the living God's son on this earth. It's called a Christophany. Look into it. Jesus shows up in the Old Testament and the New from the beginning to the end. It's incredible. Anyways, there is this moment where Elijah running straight up for his life. Just after the showdown on the mountain of Carmel, I always think of that would be delicious. But then what goes down there is he challenges 400 of the most unrelentingly powerful sorcerers in Babylonian magical practices in the land during the days of Jezebel, right, and Ahab, some of the worst humans in the history of known time. He challenges them and all these other priests of Asherah, horrible nightmare, terrible goddess worship. Bad stuff, the worst kind. He challenges all those youngins and oldins to a showdown. They end up laying up a sacrifice, and he's like, how about this? One of us makes fire come out of heaven. Deal? Everybody agreed? Be a pretty supernaturally powerful thing? Most assuredly. Got it. They all try it for a long time. They go to sacrificial blood offerings and blood covenants and oaths, and they're spilling their blood because you got to generally spill your blood if you really want to get into the serious God worship. It generally requires always blood. Angels, fallen angels especially, need blood. They don't have it. They need it in abundance. That being said, they try to do this showdown. Elijah calls down the living God, calls on him once, by the way. The fire comes down and burns up the dust. I don't know if you've ever seen fire burn dust. Apart from starting fires with massive quantities of, if you didn't know it, flour. Flour carries fire. Like, do you see what I'm getting at here? Anyways, the flour, it's exciting. He pours out his fire, and it consumes even the dust of the earth, the stones. It like licks up all the water because he poured so much water on it to try to be like, nobody can argue that just lightning came down and did this. He douses the entire offering in water. And then fire comes down out of heaven that is so serious and so powerful, it consumes stone. Like, even if their armor's made of stone, and I'm trying to tell you guys something, if you're not paying attention, their armor's made of stones, actual stones, because it's a lot better to just cover your entire body with ceramics, right? Don't we do that? Yeah, well, the badder armies of your serious, soon-to-be present tense, yeah, they have stone for their armor. It's really effective. It's shockingly effective. It's better than most anything man's ever made. Look up corundum armor. If you haven't started looking at and finding ways to weave sapphire and rubies into your armor, you should do that immediately. Make shields out of sapphires and rubies. Actual shields. I'm talking about fibers. Make it fibrous. Make it fibrous and layer it chaotically, like seashells that smash together on the shore. What's it called? Loki, I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm getting into armor talk. I've been waiting a long time to talk to you guys about making better armor. And if you haven't looked at seashells that squish together and crumple together, that tends to be the best way. It absorbs massive amounts of shock because it's got some flex to it. Anyways, stone armor, flour, fire. Back to where we were. Elijah pouring down, Yahweh answering Elijah's request, pouring down fire from heaven. Obviously, this is a jaw-dropping moment where everybody else looks around and goes, that guy's God is obviously the one true God. Let's follow him. Hey, yes, Elijah, see all these homies? We used to worship them a lot. We used to actually go kill our babies for the convenience of our corporate jobs for them. We don't do that anymore, right? Praise God, actually. There's a reprieve. What a mercy. Guess what? They stop and they see the power of the living God out of one mighty man, mind you, one. 650 mighty bad men, mighty Gibborim, like that's 1/600. It's incredible odds. One mighty man, fire of the living God, confirms the word. They all turn, they slaughter all those priests, win, checkpoint. You're moving on to the next level. Then Elijah, he prays and rain would come. And then it does. And he outraces a chariot with, I believe, 6 pulled horses or 4 pulled, a chariot with multiple horses with one king and maybe a servant on it. Elijah girds up his loins and runs miles faster than a chariot. Actually, with his feet, not wheels, because it's mostly foot talk now. Get good shoes and socks. Elijah books it, potentially sandals, because goodness gracious, there are those humans out there. I love you, barefooted runners. Make me like you. Just teach me your ways gently with my supple feet. He runs unquenchably fast, outruns a king who had a head start of probably hours. He outruns him on foot and shows up. And then the next day, Jezebel, the queen who was obviously shown up there, puts a hit out on him. She activates a special kill team network. Not a bad move when one guy kills 650 of your other ones and calls down real fire. That's not a good guy. You want to end that guy if he's your enemy. So she does. She puts out a hit on him and marks him. And Elijah's so terrified, he runs for his life. That makes no sense, right? He just won with a serious frenzy, but he ran for his life. And then he runs and he is so fatigued, he goes and falls down under a tree and is like, kill me. You ever prayed that? Have you ever prayed that? I've prayed that. I've prayed that a lot in my life. I prayed God kill me lots of times in my life. Like more times than any of you would ever publicly admit. I know lots of you have begged God to just to end you now because suffering is so real. Fear is so real. Panic and dread and anguish and long suffering are so real that you've been waiting your whole life to die and be freed from it. Don't forget Elijah's been through some stuff by this point in his life. Famine, drought, 3.5 years, living with a widow, seeing the dead raised, back to life. But he also was fed out of a creek by birds, most likely vomiting up his lunch. Ravens generally don't carry food, too much of it, in their beak. They carry more in their bellies. Never thought about that. That maybe the manna, maybe the manna that the Father would provide from you would come from the birds, so you should be kind to them. I'd get distracted. Elijah's on the run. He ends up laying down under a tree. An angel of the living God shows up, feeds him bread from heaven. I just want to eat. He cooks a loaf of it too. Oh, he cooks a loaf of bread for Elijah. He eats it. He also gives him water. I want to know what kind of vessel that looked like that he carried it in. He gives him water. He wakes him up again, and he immediately falls asleep. If you've ever had a spectacularly, wonderfully set-apart, delicious meal, I sometimes most assuredly would like to take a nap now. That's how Elijah is. Takes a nap, wakes up because the angel nudges him awake. I'm pretty sure he strikes him with his staff. That would be fantastic. I would love to get hit by an angel's staff gently enough to wake me, but not so hard to harm me. That would be interesting. But he eats another loaf of that delicious, sweet heavenly bread. And then he gets up and walks for 40 days and 40 nights without stopping. Wow. That's some good bread. 2 loaves of bread, 40 days, 40 nights. I'm pretty sure. I should probably look. It's unbelievable. If you've never eaten a meal that gave you 40 days and 40 nights of energy, it's because you haven't eaten some set-apart daily bread. Eat it daily. As in, it'll sustain you for 40 days and 40 nights. Most assuredly. 1 page of it. 1 bite of it. 1 word of it. It'll actually sustain you. But I need to just checkpoint my references here. Let's see then. Moab, Isaiah's messengers. Yeah, we're getting into it. Let's see. Jezebel, naughty, bad. War with Amram. I'm in a new Bible, y'all. And any of you that's been breaking in a new Bible, you know what that's like. It's going to take you a minute sometimes to try to figure out what you're doing. Oh, there's the drought. Fleas, boom. He went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a juniper tree. Good choice. And came and sat down. He requested for himself that he might die. That's a nice way of saying, kill me. That's him requesting he might die, right? Maybe it is enough now, O Yahweh. Please take my life, for I am not better than my fathers. Wow. He lay down and slept under a juniper tree. Second time it tells you that for a reason. Go hide and sleep under a juniper tree. It would behoove you. And behold, there was an angel touching him. And he said to him, arise and eat. And looked, and behold, there was at his head a bread, cake, baked on hot stones. This hot bread. And a jar, on stones, by the way. We're getting back to it. And a jar of water. So he ate and drank and lay down again. I could cry. I'm so excited. I've been waiting my whole life to talk about this. The angel of Yahweh, maybe Jesus, came down again a second time and touched him and said, arise, eat, because the journey is too great for you. So he arose and ate and drank and went in the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, to the mountain of Yahweh. Then this is where Yahweh speaks to him in a whisper. He also shakes an entire mountain, but nobody talks about how he shakes mountains. The angel of Yahweh came down and fed him a piece of bread on hot stones multiple times and said, eat because the journey is too much for you. Meaning what you're about to go through and endure, a lot of you actually, is way more than you're ready for. You have never once in your life, even if you've thought about it, been ready for what's ahead of you. Not even a little bit. None of us have. Not a single person could actually prepare themselves for the days you are facing. You can't. Because of that, you're going to need to eat some serious set-apart bread. You're going to need to eat up now because the journey is too great for you. You will not survive this. Not any of us are going to survive this. If you do, it will only be by that hand which fed Elijah in the wilderness, by the same hand that fed David in the wilderness, by the same hand that fed the Messiah when he also rebuked the counterfeit bread that was trying to be made for him and conjured for him. It's the same bread that John ate when he saw the days of revelation, of true revealing of the Lord Most High. The Father feeds his people good bread because he knows he must prepare them for long journeys. And some of you are facing the longest journey of your life. Some of you are facing the journey that is to your death. And praise the Father. Some of you have been praying your whole life to see these days. Just once to see the nation be arrested. Be silent. Be quiet. Be still for long enough to have a conversation with somebody else that actually lives next door to you and has been there for years. And you don't know their name. And you don't know anything about them because you don't love your neighbor. You don't. Almost none of you are keeping any of the instructions of this book. I sure as it wasn't. I surely was not. I have much to learn in my life. I must learn to serve my neighbors, to love my neighbors, and to care for them. Because your neighbors are the network. Don't you get it? Like your actual neighbors. Because when you can't drive because you refuse to do certain things that are required and mandated now that disagree with your commandments in order to drive about freely, when you can't go about as a free individual, you're going to be home a lot, wherever that neighborhood may be. So you better get to know your neighbors before things turn bad and everybody just reports on everybody else. Like Doeg the Edomite. There's a lot of Doegs out there who need the Lord Jesus Christ to mercifully bless them with people that love them more than they hate themselves. Murderers hate themselves more than they've ever hated anybody they've killed. And if anybody's telling you that, other than that, they're lying, and they're lying to themselves in order to save face from the coward they've been. Don't save your face. Lose your life. Lay it down. Lay your life down. Go volunteer your life down. Go literally lay your life down for the people around you now, and it will save your life. It will. Don't save your face. It'll be cut off when you stand in pride and arrogance, the sheaves and the reapers, when the true reapers come. You are not the reaper anymore. Go find another one to be your reaper. The true Lord. He'll reap everybody that needs to be reaped out. Elijah is given the bread from the set-apart hand of the living God in order to sustain him for a journey that takes him to the mountain of Yahweh, where he can receive the instructions of Yahweh. Moses was given Moses was fed the word of God that sustained him in the wilderness to get him to the mountain where he would receive the instructions of the living God. You need the bread to sustain you. David also thinks he needs the sword. So David takes that too. But the thing that David left behind there was the ephod. And the ephod, if we actually look to the rest of the story of where we're going in 1 Samuel and 2 Samuel, it's the ephod that gives David the true weapon. Constantly. That's the spiritual, that is the physical relationship that comes through being able to communicate with the living God. The armor of the priest that he puts on will end up showing up at David's camp. The reason it gets there is unbelievable violence, bloodshed, murder, and infanticide. Genocide. Genocide will bring David the rest of his toolkit. That's horrible. It shouldn't have to have cost him that, but it did. David is now standing there. We're going to read on because David needed the bread to sustain him and his men that are with him for the journey of where they're going. David needed some weapons and some armor. David, in order to get that, has to go through hell. Let me look at the time. Ooh, I'm going to pause you guys. Every one of you that stayed with me this far, we're going to take a... That's just some kind of whistling noise to mean stop, I guess. I know you're not horses, but you should have horses. If you've not looked into swords and spears and horses, you should have horses. Learn about the Pony Express. Really, I read a book on it because books are better than the garbage Black Mirrors you stare at. Go to the thrift store, even if it's illegal. Mostly illegal. Find cheap books. Find people around you who have libraries. They're called humans. They tend to keep books. None of the rats do. None of the wolves keep books. Keep books, read them, learn from them now while you have time. One of those books was called, I think, The Orphan Boys or The Lost Orphans. Look up Pony Express books with orphans in the title. That's obviously what drew me to it. You become an orphan often when you go on the run. Disinheritance is a serious thing in the families. But going on the run through the Pony Express, I'm so excited. There's just so many ways I can go with this. If you haven't set up a network of communication if you've set up a network of communication that's dependent on Black Mirror technology, you should probably set one around pen and paper. Actual pen and paper, handwritten letters. You don't have to always do the handwriting, but it would behoove you to learn how to write with your own hand because you should, by the time, if you really want to be a Gibborim, you're going to learn to write the first 5 books of this by hand. If you ever want to be in a position to potentially be appointed as a king, it was required. It still should happen. Write it out with your own hand. Write information and commands and instructions and orders in your own hand, and you can use a code to do that. Remember, I talked a little bit about this when I talked about escape and evasion, but you could use a cipher. That's kind of like a fancy way of saying codes-ish. You could, here's a basic one. For all of you, take quick notes with your hands. I'm going to tell you something that may save your life. This is a Bible. Right. They have page numbers often. Like this one. In my Bible, it's number 266. And that'll lead you to 1 Kings 18, right? Now, say I wanted to write words like ran. Oh, that's going to be hard to find. Say I wanted to use the word the in a code that I was writing out. I would go into my said Bible, prearranged, set up, book cipher, agreed upon ahead of time. And I would say, oh, hey, is there any thes in here? Oh, you betcha. This is now page. So I would write it out as 266 dash. Then I would count how many lines from the top, sentence lines. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26. So then I would write 26. And then I would go to the word. Then I'd count the word over. We read left to right in English. Obviously apply this to your language. If your Bible is right to left, do it that way. Then you count 1, 2, 3. So my code would be 266. I said 266, 26, 3. And then I might put a comma to separate my next one. And I could say the one time, and then I'd have to do it again for another letter. It's moderately tedious. And you know what? That's good for your soul because you go too fast for your own good. Book ciphers are great. They're super fun. You can practice this immediately. You could just send your buddy one of these texts randomly one night and just not say anything else and see if he figures it out. Because it's awesome. If you guys all had the same Bible or like the same book, the same book you could use all kinds of things to communicate codes. I think I started this book out talking about how there's codes hidden in it. Read the foreword. It's awesome. Anyways, this is, like I said, many years in the making, folks. There's a lot of things you got to learn out there. And if you're going to go on the run, which you're most likely going to go on the run, need to. It's probably overdue in your life. You need to learn to set up codes of communication ahead of time, which is why write it out with your own hand instead of typing it into a machine that's ever been hooked up to the interweb. And then you can put it in an envelope and seal it. Because if you don't have a seal, make one. Make one. You know what this is? This is obviously a fossil of awesomeness. If you didn't know, go check out Nature Nate. I find treasures because I pray to the living God and he leads me to them. You can do that. It's free and available anytime you want. This is a fossil, one of the first fossil teeth I have ever found in the history of my life. Do you know what it is too? Probably a deer. I don't think you can see that super well. I keep moving my hand around. But there's enamel. It's awesome. I sanded it and polished it so it's smooth and it feels good on my face and my neck meat. This is also something that can bear a seal because it's got all these indentations and divots and random irregular patterns in it that are wholly unique to this. Teeth are like that more than you think. Horse teeth especially. Horse teeth are really unique and good for signet rings. So then you can fold that envelope up and pour some good wax on it. If you remember earlier, I told you about how cheese wax or sealing wax is a great way to seal micro SD cards, but then you could just seal the stamp on it, right? And then that goes in your name and your authority. And I think if you encode your codes with the word of God, it also supernaturally seals them up in a way that, the key of David, that's, if you haven't read Revelation, do it. You actually get a blessing for reading a book, promised forever. I don't think you'll lose that. Read the book. It says that Jesus has the key of David upon him that opens doors that no man can shut and shuts doors that no man can open. That's basically the most super powerful locking and encryption technology known ever. Pray that over your stuff. So write a code, put it in an envelope, then put it in a nice little leather satchel or bag, or you could just tape it to your left inner thigh. That also is a good place for it. You might need to gorilla tape that letter then because sweaty legs, if you're not wearing wool to absorb that sweat, you need to. Put it on a horse's back and then ride it because then you're doing the Pony Express. And you can have relay stations all along the way where you can change horses and resupply and change riders. And you can set up the Pony Express again now because you're going to need it because you're way too dependent on black mirrors to save you and communicate. It's going to be a lot of like leaflets, like hand flyers out there again. Because you know what? The word of God goes forth regardless of what men do. And technology's been a wonderful tool. But there's going to be a time where using this, like persecuted underground church members deal with every single day, they can't get on one of these or allow their voice to be heard within a microphone, lest they have a drone land on their face. And I don't mean the flying portion of the drone. I mean like the hellfire demonic arrow we fire at them with. And by we, of course, I'm speaking in generalities because that's America, right? Yeah, sometimes we kill Christians. What? Americans would never. I do declare we have never killed a Christian in another country who was operating under the unction of the living God to establish a tyrannical reign in another place? You know nothing about the way wars are fought. And there's snide, sneaky Doeg, the Edomite shepherds all over the world who rat out good Christian believers and sell them out as terrorists so they'd be slaughtered by their enemies in order to advance their kingdom on this earth. It happens constantly. It's called quid pro quo. Not a good idea, but it happens with regularity. So instead, underground movements rely on word of mouth. That's this piece, these things, your eyes, books, paper, and less electronics. So think about that next time you go and look at horses, okay? You should look into horses. If you haven't yet, we all need to have horses scattered all across the country on tiny little farms with wonderful pasture lands beyond them. And we all need to learn to ride horses and carry spears, obviously, because look at the thumbnail for part 1 of Becoming a Gibborim. That's an Iberian. If you don't know about Iberians, you need to know about Iberians. Good gardeners who the Romans kicked in the nether regions one too many times, who took that spear and this sword and cut their shields in half and cut their heads off with them. So it's not wise to poke an Iberian's nether legions unless you really intend to have your sword taken out of your own hand and used to cut your face off with it. Needless to say, the Pony Express, look into it. Think about that next time you want to send a letter to somebody. Do it. Try to do it by foot. Try to just send one thing by foot once in your life. Have you ever actually walked to your neighbor's door and fed them a meal? One time. Because these people are starving to death now. And I'm not only talking about like they don't have bread. I'm talking about they have been starving to death because they've been going to churches where they were feeding them poisoned bread every day of the week. They've been going to the house of the Lord to be ministered to, and instead they were going to the house of Doeg the Edomite. They were going to the shepherd who was really just a wolf in sheep's clothing. And instead they're stuck in their houses waiting for someone to bring them the bread of life. Maybe you should be that today with immediate sincerity and hope and a willingness to die for the sake of what you believe in. Because you need to be willing to die for your convictions now. Not like, if someday they ever ask me, then I'll say it. I will stay. I will be for Jesus, and then they can kill me. No, you won't. You really won't, because you didn't do it now. You won't do that now. If you won't do that now, you won't do that then, because you're a coward now. And I mean that, I'll say that enough because I love you. You're a coward if you've not gone and laid your life down for the people around you. Get over it. Your life is not your own. Or you can just go ahead and join Doeg the Edomite and be a snitch and a murderer and a liar and a thief and a scoundrel. You can go join that camp anytime you want. That's fine. I'm trying to call people out of it and come to a much more powerful, well-equipped, immediately meaningful reason to live their life and to lay it down and to potentially pick up a sword again. So I really highly encourage you to go actually get to know the people around you while you still can. Pick up a phone today and maybe call some people and tell them you sincerely care about them and you love them and you want to make sure if there's any way you can serve them that you do that. Go serve them, because David is about to serve. David is about to be served by some of the most incredible people that have ever come into his midst. These are David's mighty men, and they've come to him for such a time as this. They are on their way. David doesn't know it yet, but so too are the armies of Saul, and they are about to hunt him for the rest of his life. The rest of Saul's life. That's like the one accomplishment he's going to seek, really, is to just kill this flea. David calls himself a flea, by the way. Saul's efforts for the rest of his life are going to be to kill that guy. It's hard to kill a flea with a spear. I've tried it. I actually have a spear, and I've tried to swat at tiny bugs with it. It's very difficult, which is why it's good to be a flea in the presence of a spear and not be a spear in the presence of Goliath. Okay, I get distracted. Go out there today. Do something of serious dedication. I'm going to carry this on to part 2 of part 6, because some of your attention spans is like that of a flea. A brother of the blade. Go out there. Be vigilant. Remember, be safe out there. And by that I mean, live as dangerously as possible with strategic intentionality every single moment, because the days are evil, but you were born for such a time as this. So go find a good sword, and then also find a good tool like this and start practicing with it, because who knows? Maybe you'll one day be entrusted the opportunity to cut through armor that's made of this. Find a way to make this go through this, and you can advance to level 7 in Gibborim talk. I love you. Be vigilant out there, and no matter what, be on guard. Be ready. Put on good socks. Get yourself a drinking bottle, and go eat some good bread. I'll see you soon.